Hello everybody, I'm Rebecca Martinez and today I'm going to show you how to make some vegan bagels. This bread recipe will be divided into 2 days. On the first day we're going to prep the dough. Obviously we have to make it first, and we start by doing that with a scale, a large bowl, some water, and some sourdough starter. I will leave in the description how to make the stiff sourdough starter, but you can use just regular starter. Stiff allows for a better rise, so I'll leave this all in the description. Start by adding 310 grams of water, ideally around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the starter. The total starter I think was about 100 grams of starter in all, and you have to prepare this the night before. It's really stiff. You can tell that it's ready when it's super bubbly, and ideally it's in a mason jar so you can see that it's really nice and bubbly. As you start adding a little by little, you can tell that it will actually float. Use a whisk and combine until thoroughly well incorporated. We're making some bagels here with some whole wheat flour. Add 200 grams of whole wheat flour in addition to some vital wheat gluten. If you do not have vital wheat gluten, feel free to substitute for a high protein flour like bread flour. And lastly, add 200 grams of all-purpose flour. You can play around with these ratios, but be aware that you might have to add more water. Using your hand, incorporate everything until your flour is completely saturated with water and there are no dry parts. Cover it with a clean towel and let it rest for 15 to 30 minutes so the water gets well incorporated. Now we're going to flavor the dough with 10 grams of salt. I choose 10 grams as a bare minimum when working with 500 grams worth of flour total, but you can add more or less depending on your dietary needs. With some wet hands, we're going to incorporate this salt by first grabbing the dough from the outside circumference of it and pulling it up and adding it to the center of the dough. Now the pincer method is the method I like to use with wet hands. Carefully use your index finger and thumb and incorporate and pinch the dough multiple times until it kind of looks like you're forming little bubbles. I do this around 4 to 5 times in addition to taking the outer edges of the dough and bringing it towards the middle. I like to give it a quick knead on a clean surface and then let it rest in a clean bowl with the tea towel on top and set it aside. After it's rested for about 30 minutes, we're going to start a series of stretch and folds 30 minutes apart. I added 3 stretch and folds to the spread. That's when I noticed that the gluten was developing wonderfully. Depending on your flours, the bread flour, if you choose to use it instead of vital wheat gluten, you may need more or less. But start with this 3 stretch and folds at 30 minutes apart as your baseline.
I hope it never ends. Let's be more than friends. Yeah.
Now, once your dough looks slightly risen, we're going to give it about 2 hours, 3 hours of bulk fermentation as we continuously add these stretch and folds. And before you're going to shape the dough, you have to, of course, release it from the bowl itself. So the dough should be nice and jiggly and should have displays of aeration and some volume to it as opposed to the first initial mixing of the dough. And we're going to separate it into 6 individual and equal portions of dough using a bread scale. I may double the recipe, so I'm making 12 here. That's why it looks like so much more, but use it depending on how many you'd like. Of course, the ratios are for 6 rather than 12, all of the grams and stuff, but I will be sure to describe that as well in the description. To shape bagels, first you're going to take your one portion and shape it into a bun. If you want a reference, I have this in my previous video from last week when I made whole wheat hamburger buns, but basically you want to stretch it. You want to take the outer edges, brush them towards the center and then add a little tension by using either your hands or the surface on which you are working. We're just going to shape them into buns at this point because we shape them into bagels after we've given them a 15-minute rest or so. We'll do this to every single portion of the bagels, so the 6 or 12 individual portions that you create. For the proving, we're going to add a little bit of grease to a large baking tray, and we're going to put 6 individual bagel portions onto the baking tray about 2 inches apart. I find that 6 is the perfect amount. You're going to add a little bit of grease to them because we're going to have to put parchment paper or some cling film on top. But to shape a bagel, in a previous video on a short, I showed you how to do this. If you're interested, I'll leave it linked below. There are 2 ways to shape bagels basically. The super simple way, which I've done here, which is basically just put a little hole, and another more complicated way. I like to then put individual parchment paper squares under every single bagel because this will be super easy when you have to bake the bagels before you put them in the oven in their water bath. So just be mindful of it. This is a nice little trick that makes your bagel baking easier. Cover it with some parchment paper or cling film and then put the bagels into your refrigerator for an overnight relaxation and fermentation. For day 2, hopefully you're starting your bake in the morning. Your bagels will be about the same size but a little bit puffed up. You want them to be slightly risen. And I wanted to add just a little bit of seasoning to half of them. I started with 3 tablespoons of sesame seeds, some nigella seeds, they have a mild onion flavor, just about 1 tablespoon worth. This ingredient is optional. A tablespoon of poppy seeds, which I adore. Lemon poppy seed is one of my favorite flavorings, and about a teaspoon of salt. And if you want, you can add some garlic powder, which I added sort of a little later than planned when I thought about adding it. So just give it a good whisk with your hands or with a normal whisk and set it aside. The water bath in which we will pre-cook the bagels will be basically water in a large pot, really, with some baking soda and a tablespoon of molasses. You can also use the more traditional condiment instead of molasses, which I will leave in the description, but molasses is normally what I have around in my kitchen, so that's what I use. With the parchment paper, you will simply drop the bagels inside of the water bath and cook them for 1 minute on each side. To flip them, hopefully you have a spider, which I will leave also in the description for you all. This is just one of those nifty kitchen tools that makes bread baking super easy, and I love it, and it's super affordable. You can find it almost anywhere. They should be nice and golden because of the molasses, and immediately put them in the topping if you wish to have sesame seeds or a bit of salt, etc. right after they've been in that water bath. Now we're going to adjust our oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit and bake these bagels for 25 to 27 minutes, flipping them halfway. Once they're done baking, they will have a beautiful golden brown crust on the ones that are plain, and of course we will see that topping for those that we've baked with our everything sort of sesame seed bagel topping. After about 5 to 10 minutes of chilling on the baking tray, you want to put it on a cooling rack and let them chill. I use these to eat some wonderful pizza bagels and bagel sandwiches. They come in handy. Be sure to subscribe for next week's video.